this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with some Boros Burn. This is going to be in a replay format, as these are some leagues that I did while off stream last week that I haven't gotten around to recording yet. So we're going to be working on recording them today. I'm probably not going to do the full league in each video. I'm probably going to break it down into maybe 3 or 4 matches in each thing. Starting with a quick deck tech and moving on to a couple of replay matches. So, Boros Burn, a lot of people think this is going to be a well-positioned deck coming out of the bannings of Uro, Simian Spirit Guide, Mystic Sanctuary, the change of the Cascade rule, and the change to Field of the Dead. A lot of the format getting shaken up, a lot of the fast combo decks that could give burn problems, like Upsal spells and such. No longer in the format. Control, especially the Uro variants, obviously no longer exists, so Control has to adapt. You're seeing a lot of blue-white Control. There were some adaptations of the 4-color Omnath piles. They've kind of become a 5-color Bring to Light Scapeshift variant, either with or without Valky. So there's been a lot of mutations over the format over the last week or so since the bannings and the Cascade rule went live, but Boros is always kind of a steady force. There are decks that are kind of a hard counter to it. Heliod and Bogles have both seen an uptick in play, as a little bit easier to manage those decks, when you're not playing against a ton of control decks. And, Prowess has slowly been returning to the format as well, which is an interesting, if tricky, matchup for Burn. So, this is the basic list that I've been working on for a while. The one departure from a lot of lists is I'm not running Fiery Islet. Maybe I should be, but I do find that the extra paying of life sometimes can be painful in the, mirrors against whether it be, Burn, Prowess, Shadow, any of those kind of racing situations. I find that can be painful. As far as spells in the deck, your typical Swift Spear or Goblin Guide, these 16 and kind of Boros Charm, as well as Eidolon, are kind of your core of any burn deck. You pretty much see these 24, and you can argue, Riftbolt, Skewer, whatever. You generally see these spells, but not necessarily in the same amounts. A lot of times, 4 of Riftbolt's kind of, the norm. Sometimes it's not for some people. So it's just like these 16 slots, or sometimes 17 if you only run 19 lands, are taken up by some number of Skullcrack, Searing Blaze, Lightning Helix, Skewer, Riftbolt. Obviously, Skullcrack's, much more important when you're facing down a ton of life gain in the format, whether it be timely reinforcements, or an Uro was legal, or Heliod combo, etc. Searing Blaze is important when you're facing a large number of creature decks, and quite frankly, there's a large number of creature decks right now. Both with the resurgence of the Mirror and Prowess, as well as, Death Shadow decks, the various Heliod and Hammer decks, etc. Lightning Helix. The most important card when you're basically playing the Mirror and other racing situations like humans. Riftbolt, very efficient card, but obviously a little bit awkward if you're seeing an uptick in Teferi Time Raveler. And also if you're playing some number of Rolling Vortex in your sideboard, this can be a very awkward card sometimes, as casting it for 3 is not ideal. Skewer the Critics also can be an awkward card. It's a 3-mana sorcery that you have to trigger damage during your turn, which granted isn't that difficult, but in the mid to late turns can be. As you're either hellbent or playing off the top, and sometimes you only have 2 lands in play, maybe because you've been cycling some stuff, your opponent's attacking your land base, etc. So sometimes this card can be tricky even in the early turns to do if your opponent's able to go, play a quick blocker to stonewall your attackers, and you don't have any 1-mana spells. This card can be hard to get out of your hand in a timely fashion sometimes. So each one of these cards is kind of situational. In situations where they're good, they're very good. In situations where they're kind of they're eh. The worst of the batch, as far as when they're bad, is Searing Blaze, but it also has the highest upside. Only doing 1 damage to a creature, 1 damage to a player, not ideal exactly. Obviously, when you can trigger landfall, dealing 3 to a creature and 3 to a player is pretty awesome. But your opponent has to be playing creatures, and there are some decks in the format that just don't play any relevant creatures. Some of the hard control decks and such sometimes don't do it, and then sometimes the newer variants of Ad Nauseam variants that are trying to adapt to the Lost Simian Spirit Guide really only play things like copies of Thassa's Oracle, which when they put that on the stack, you're pretty much dead anyway. Sideboard, Path to Exile, pretty much for creature matchups. is your main answer to things like Core Firewalker and Oriok Champion, which are really annoying to play against, as well as basically everything out of Heliod, also pretty good against Tarmogoyf, Death Shadows, etc., as there's also been a resurgence in Jund, or mid-range in general. Core Firewalker is primarily here for the mirror and for any type of red-based deck, so Goblins that comes in. Roiling Vortex, additional anti-life gain stuff, also hits any type of free spells people are trying to cast, Force of Negation, etc. Decent against any type of living end piles, also for that same reason. 2 copies of Wear Tear over Smash, because Leyline Sanctity is seeing a little bit of an uptick right now. So I think the utility of Wear Tear and also an uptick in Bogles is quite nice to have that at, in addition to having us to things like Chalice. And Relic is always just kind of been my favored graveyard hate of note. I know most people prefer Rest in Peace and just a normal mana, but I like Relic. Yes, it is a little bit more mana intensive, holding up mana against Dredge and such, but I also like to have kind of a value card against the control decks, when they were running Mystic Sanctuary, Uro, etc. But it's still a good mid-range killer against Tarmogoyf and such. So let's get into some matches. We're here for match number 1. We win the die roll, so we get to choose to be on the play, which is always positive. Evaluating this hand's a bit tricky, because no 1-mana creature. We do have a lot of 1-mana plays. The best burn hands, obviously, are 1-drop creature, centric hands, put pressure on the opponent early. I do usually throw back these hands on the play, usually keep them on the draw, as you have a higher chance of drawing a land on the draw. So I don't remember if I kept this hand or not, but I do think this hand is a mulligan, simply because it's risky keeping a 1-lander. Apparently I agree with myself. However, we go down to a 5-land 6-card hand, or a 5-land hand. This obviously has to be a mulligan as well. Opponent keeps 5. We mulligan to this kind of miserable 5-card hand, but play a Lava Spike and pass. Our opponent plays a Mountain and a Swizzle Spear. Attacks us. We draw a Searing Blaze, which is one of the better draws in our deck. This is kind of a no-brainer here. If they have something like Mutagenic Growth, that's fine. We still deal them 3 damage, and that's 3 damage we're not taking during our turn. So it looks like we're up against some variant of Mono Red Prowess without a without a companion. Thinking maybe it was a traditional Mono Red Prowess, but it looks like it's actually just blue-red with some type of no blue sources other than whatchamacallit. Now go ahead and Lightning Helix the Sprite Dragon here, because the Sprite Dragon has the potential to grow out of range of any of our creature killing things. And the more creatures you leave in play, the more in danger you are of just dying to a reasonable draw from them. So we draw Searing Blaze, which isn't ideal without a land. Opponent, fortunately, doesn't seem to be able to capitalize very much, only deals us 9. However, they have a light up the stage into another light up the stage. We hit a land drop. Go ahead and kill this Soulscar Mage. Once again, you don't want to leave creatures in play, letting them do things. They play Stormling Entity. So they're having a really awkward draw. We mulligan to 5, remember. So I Rift Bolt there, which, obviously putting them into 2 would be great, but them untapping with 2 creatures, once again, very big danger. They play Soulscar Mage, hits for 1. We draw a Skewer the Critics, which obviously is a bit of a danger, and then if they have any type of spell here, they kill us. And they don't, so they're flooding hard pretty over there. We draw Eidolon, so we unfortunately can't capitalize. A little bit of a unique list from our Prowess opponent, but, they did flood out. Plus, they had 2 lands in exile that they didn't play either. So, our opponent played a lot of lands, didn't really do much of anything. We mulliganed to 5, but didn't keep a very relevant hand. I still think keeping Skewer the Critics was correct there, because basically any burn spell or any creature there, at least gives us a chance to win the game. It's kind of hard to say what they're holding on to hand. One potential card could be something like Lava Dart, but I think Lava Dart would have been played the previous turn to kill us. So opponent just looked like they just had a very poor draw and flooded out. Or I guess they had a reasonable draw, but they flooded out, and we had a mulligan to 5. Maybe we were supposed to keep that first hand. Maybe we win that game as a result. But if we don't draw a land, we also die. So, it's kind of the risk when you're playing Burn, is evaluating those opening hands. One of the biggest skills with the deck. Looking at sideboarding before game number 2. Things are a little bit awkward with the sideboarding against that deck. Board out the 4 copies of Boros Charm. Boros Charm is one of the first cards I usually cut in the non-creature matchups, or in creature-based matchups, simply because they generally don't affect the board all that much. Sometimes you keep it in against Jund or such, but against the heavy creature mirrors, you tend to bring in all your anti-creature stuff. I cut the 4 Boros Charms, the 2 Skull Cracks, and 1 Eidolon to fit in the 4 copies of Path to Exile, and the 3 copies of Core Firewalker. Path, obviously, because if you answer most of the creatures, they're a far worse version of Burn. And, Core Firewalker simply because, it's a pro-red creature against a primarily red-based deck, other than things like Brazen Burrower and Stormwing Entity. So we're going to play this game. Take a look at our opening hand. We have a painful opening hand, but a powerful one. We have Swift Spear into Core Firewalker, which does require us to fetch shock, barring drawing something like Inspiring Vantage. But I still think the upside's worth that, especially if they don't have a Brazen Burrower or a Kozilek's Return, which are generally their primary ways of answering. This is a completely bluff attack. Our opponent could easily have blocked and blown us out a little bit. So maybe that attack was a little bit unnecessary, but we just play Core Firewalker and pass. Opponent does Lava Dart, probably here to trigger, light up the stage most likely. Looking for answers to things. They see Spell Pierce and Lightning Bolt. We go ahead and just kill their creature. Once again, if they have something like Mutagenic Growth, they get to save it, but then we get that information before we attack. Our opponent plays Bright Dragon, plays Bolt to kill our Swift Spear. Once again, killing creatures is kind of the thing in these matchups. We draw Searing Blaze, which could be good down the line. We just kill their dude before it can grow out of range of our removal. They play Dragon's Claw, so this kind of becomes a life gain racing situation. Notably, don't play our Mountain here, so we can trigger Searing Blaze on a later turn should our opponent draw a creature. Attack in for some damage here. They see Stormwing Entity. We play Eidolon to make things a little bit more painful for them. Opponent cracks their land. They play Manamorphose. So they're gaining life, we're gaining life, everybody's happy. If they have Spell Pierce here, obviously it's a little bit awkward, but they still take 8 points of damage to do that. So opponent has Bolt to protect it. Kills our Eidolon, so the game kind of gets to go a little bit weird here. I still serve in an attack. Don't want to attack with Core Firewalker into the red creature, obviously. Opponent has Manamorphose. Again, things kind of go a little bit crazy when they're doing these things. They cast an Opt, which doesn't really trigger anything. We have a second Dragon's Claw, which makes most of our burn spells pretty terrible. They could chunk us for 6 here, but obviously they just die on board. We fetch. We draw Path to Exile, play the Path. Our opponent does a valiant job here to stay alive. We put them to 1. We won't crack it. See nothing. Attack. Opponent plays a Lava Dart, flashes Lava Dart back. Once again, staying alive. They kill our Goblin God in the process. They're doing a lot of cycling. They do a Manamorphose. Nothing. We play a land, which might have been a mistake there, giving away a little bit of information. But our opponent plays another Lava Dart, so we probably should have played Eidolon pre-combat. We play the Eidolon here. Opponent goes to 4. They flash back Lava Dart. We're gaining an absurd amount of life as well, and our opponent finally scoops. So kind of a crazy game with some Dragon's Claws, so that means I should probably bring in some number of Wear Tears, potentially in game number 3. We'll see if I agree with that assessment in the past. So interestingly enough, on the draw here, it looks like I chose to remove the Eidolons and bring in 2 of the copies of Wear Tear. But I still feel like I have something in my deck that wasn't in there before. because we had some number of the Eidolons in the post-board config. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 sideboard cards. So I have the 4 Path, the 3 Oriok Champion, and the 2 Wear Tear. So I guess I took out the Eidolons on the draw. Maybe I had some of them out in game number 2 and I just didn't pay attention whenever we were going through that video. We are on the draw. This hand is... This is one of those hands that, once again, if this were on the play, I would mulligan this. But on the draw, with a Core Firewalker and a Bolt, I think this hand's reasonable enough. So I do think we keep this hand and see if we get paid off. Opponent goes with a Swift Spear. We immediately draw a Sacred Foundry. Once again, priority with Prowess is to kill their creatures, because once again, they are a much, much worse version of Burn. Once again, killing their creature, could possibly have played Core Firewalker there. We play Firewalker, we play Goblin, or I guess we play Swift Spear here, because it's a higher priority target, so maybe it was correct to play Goblin God. Can definitely see why our opponent kept the hand they kept. And I'm doing this Boros Charm is a little bit too cute. You know, especially since our opponent's not representing Kozilek's Return here. I just do this. Play the dude, gain a ridiculous amount of life. Continue to hold up Boros Charm. And then we just swing, put them to 4, and then suspend a Rift Bolt, and our opponent concedes. So, a little bit of sequencing error there with the Swift Spear. Maybe I'm supposed to play Goblin Guide instead. Obviously, it'd be more damage, but our opponent is like obligated to kill whatever creature we play that they could target anyway. So, Core Firewalker, obviously pretty key in any type of red mirrors. Our opponent does have outs to it. Usually, their out of choice is something like Kozilek's Return. Another thing that can occur, and a lot of it depends on the build, like against some of the M. Hayashi, Obosh, Prowess lists, one of the outs is us blocking with Core Firewalker and them using Stomp on our face or another creature. You know, that is a damage prevention clause, and then protection from red kind of goes out the window in that particular case. Very similar to what you can do in Burn Mirrors with Skullcrack. Against protection from red creatures, you attack in, they block, you Skullcrack, you know, the Core Firewalker or Oriok Champion can die. So, you know, something to know whenever you're playing red, that there are outs to Core Firewalker even if you don't have Path to Exile readily available. So, anyways, let's go on to the next match. Back here for match number 2. With the die roll again, which is always nice. Taking a look at this hand. We don't have a 1-drop creature, but Rift Bolt into Eidolon's pretty good in a lot of spots, so definitely a keep. Some debate whether you play the Sunbit Canyon or the Fetch Land first because of Searing Blaze. Opponent does mulligan to 6. I decided to play the Fetch here, conserving our life total a little bit with Eidolon. Pass the turn, we Rift Bolt our opponent's face. Now, Polluted Delta could be a lot of things right now, especially early in the format. Looks like it's just the Jeskai Control, or perhaps 4-color Bring to Light, 5-color Bring to Light, which was starting to appear at this point. Opponent, it looks like they're just on Jeskai so far. We go ahead and crack, because all of our stuff is sorcery speed. I'm kind of hoping our opponent plays like a Snapcaster Mage here, instead they just play Lightning Bolt, which is fine. Once again, choosing not to play anything here. I play a Bolt in response because our counter spells our opponent can have are limited. They could have Force of Negation if they really want to. That's a 2-for-1 in our favor, though. Once again, holding up a crack of Sunbit Canyon. Just cracking that here at the end of turn. We have no reason really to go for it yet. Our opponent's not putting any pressure on the battlefield. We're just drawing cards. Once again, just passing the turn. They play Jace. They do the thing. They have a Fetch Land. We play a Lava Spike. They're obligated to Force of Negation that in case we're sitting on Skewer the Critics. Play Lava Spike. We play that. We play Skewer the Critics. They only had the 1 copy of Force of Negation. Like I said, maybe they didn't have a ton going on in hand for this kind of matchup. You know, no lightning helixes or anything. So they were just kind of obligated to tap out for Jace, and kind of leaves them a little bit more vulnerable to, you know, what's going on with our hand. So quite kind of a textbook situation for Burn against any blue-white X deck that wasn't packing Uros. You don't have to worry about life gain as much, especially in game 1, where their only life gain out of this particular deck is something like Lightning Helix. So back for game number 2 with sideboarding. The easy sideboard out, especially since we didn't see any, you know, like spell quellers or, you know, any of that kind of nonsense. Any type of like Stoneforge Mystic package or anything. Game number 1, the easy out is something like Searing Blaze. We also board out a couple of Rift Bolts because we're boarding in the 3 copies of Inspiring Vantage as well as 3 copies of Relic of Progenitus. Once again, Relic is kind of a shot in the dark because of something like Snapcaster Mage. While, you know, it is considerably worse in a meta without, you know, Mystic Sanctuary and Uro, you know, still having a value card that you can get down, limit their graveyard. You know, they could be back to playing things like Logic Knot as well. But, you know, oftentimes things like Timely Reinforcements, Snap Timely Reinforcements are just basically unbeatable. So, you know, having that little bit of hedge. As far as Rift Bolt, so our opponent is a blue-white X deck. Number 1, we're bringing in Vortex. I can never remember that because I always think of Sulfuric Vortex, which is the original one. But, you know, playing Rift Bolt off Suspend deals us 5 damage, which is somewhat relevant against a deck that's featuring Bolt and possibly Lightning Helix. And then also, you know, it doesn't play very particularly well against Fairy Time Raveler. Should they happen to leave that in their deck, it can strain it and suspend. And sometimes we can't always afford to play around that eventuality, so cutting back on the number of cards in that is a nice thing. This hand's reasonable. We have 16 points of burn overall, 2 lands, so I think this hand's a keep. Our opponent just plays the thing. We go ahead. I fetch for a white source here, although, like I mentioned, our life total can be under a little bit of duress. The big thing here, this was actually a mistake because our opponent could play Teferi next turn. And while I'm trying to overtax their mana, if they would have had a 3rd land into Teferi here, we could have been in a lot of trouble. You know, losing a spell to just basically for free kind of sucks. Once again, I suspend it to kind of overtax their mana. Opponent's doing what they can. I play a Boros Charm here. They don't counter it. I Rift Bolt them. They decide to force a negation that, which I found interesting. Pitching a Teferi Time Raveler, which would have been really awkward with our thing. I play Eidolon after doing that. They play a Snapcaster Mage. They can't really do anything with it, but we're just kind of in this waiting game where I'm not obliged to attack, and they can't really afford to attack, so this is basically an enchantment that says, well, you're in a lot of trouble. And our opponent does the Shark Typhoon thing. We put them to 1. So basically they can't cast any spells, although I do think they should be attacking with their Shark here. You know, putting our life total under duress is one thing a control deck has to be able to do. They have probably Cryptic Command here. We Boros Charm in response. This basically means that even if they have Force of Negation, they're just dead, which I do believe they end up having Force of Negation here. Yep, pitching Snapcaster Mage. So, really don't know what the red was for. We saw Bolt. I don't know if they had Lightning Helix. Presumably they had some number of Lightning Helixes, some number of Timely Reinforcements. Their hand overall wasn't terrible, but, you know, our hand was very good. You know, with Eidolon resolving, you know, put us in a pretty good situation, and they didn't really seem to have an answer for it. You know, as you see, they're Cryptic Commanding in here. And then we just kind of sequencing things correctly to where they, you know, they can't deal with everything overall. And we drew really well, and our opponent was a little less fortunate. And once again, can't really underestimate how important these canopy lands can be in some of these mid to long game situations where flooding out would be crippling to Burn in some of those spots previously. So, awesome game against Jeskai, and let's move on to one more match for this particular video. We are back for match number 3 on the play, which is awesome. We're up against an 80 card Yorion deck. This hand is pretty reasonable overall. Once again, Rift Bolt into Eidolon or Rift Bolt into Searing Blaze, depending on how creature-based our opponent is. We suspend Rift Bolt. Opponent plays Plains, so we're kind of obligated to kill that. I did that there because I'm going to be playing Eidolon here instead of holding up Searing Blaze, because our opponent could just like play Thalia or something, and then we just watch our kind of things go bye-bye. Here I should probably have played Goblin Gun actually, but it was a bit of a slip up here on my part. I suspend Rift Bolt, and then I guess I'm holding up Lightning Bolt. Don't know if that's correct or not. Opponent does the thing. We bolt. Do we bolt here at the end of turn? I don't think so. I don't use my mana at all, which once again seems incorrect. Just bolt their thing out of the way. Get in for some damage here. Opponent has an Archon of Emeria, but they choose to play a Skyclave Apparition, which in some regards is a 2-for-1. We do the thing, attack them, hit them to that. They play a Noble Hierarch, they play a Flicker Wisp, flickering the token, which is fine. We just Boros Charm their face, untap, and bolt them. So, this match, I think, ends up featuring a lot of punts, which I don't want to get into too much because we'll see them in Game 2 and Game 3. But, you know, sometimes just, you know, going through motions of games, sometimes you really need to pay attention to your sequencing. You know, utilizing your mana, like, you know, maybe we were supposed to bolt the Leonin Arbiter there at the end of turn. Like, one argument for not bolting is, you know, drawing a Monastery Swiftspear or something. But, you know, sometimes you're just trying to utilize all your mana. Sometimes it's just important to do that. So, might have been incorrect there. But let's get into some sideboarding, shall we? So our opponent is very clearly some type of variant of Death and Taxes. So sideboarding is a little bit awkward in these situations. So Eidolon generally comes out against any type of Taxes variant because they're usually an Ether Vial deck. Now, an 80-card Yorion deck, how often are you going to see that card? I don't know. Do they have Stoneforge Mystic in their deck? Once again, I don't know. So generally I board out Eidolons against potential Ether Vial decks. Once again, also board out Boros Charm against these kind of creature-based decks. Brought in 3 copies of Vortex and then the 4 copies of Path. Bringing in Vortex because I suspect some type of life gain situation, whether it be Firewalker or Yorion Champion, etc. While it's not the best in creature-based matchups, I do tend to bring it in against any type of life gain situation, especially when I have additional copies of Skullcrack. That's kind of where we're at with sideboarding. Opponent being an 80-card Yorion deck, kind of hard to know what all's in their wheelhouse. Opening hands, pretty nice. We have a 1-drop creature backing up by some removal. Obviously, everything outside of Lightning Bolt can be a little bit awkward. Whenever you're playing against the Leonin Arbiter deck, you generally want to lean on your fetches, which is kind of, you know, anti synergy with our blaze effects, but because you like to hold on to your fetches as long as possible in those situations. Opponent plays a Thalia. We attack. They don't block. We suspend Rift Bolt, play our other Swiftspear. So you could argue that I'm supposed to bolt there, just get in for some more damage. But the problem with that is if they just have another Thalia, turning that on kind of can be a pain in the butt sometimes. Just let them get in for damage here. Opponent plays an Arbiter, which I found interesting. We bolt their Thalia here. Yeah. So we can go there. We draw that, so we get to like maximize our play here. They path one of our dudes, which kind of sucks because that means we don't get a land out of it, but they have Stoneforge Mystic in their deck for Batterskull. We draw that. Bolt here. So I could cast Skewer the Critics, but I choose to hold up Skullcrack. So they have Yorion Champion here, which is really kind of annoying. Skullcrack and on end step. Right, this is where the first mistake ends up happening, actually. So I shouldn't have Skullcrack there, and you'll see why here in a second. So one of the awkward things with these decks is their ability to do this. So, okay. Set up here, Stoneforge Mystic, we get to deal them damage, right? So, Auriok Champion, under normal circumstances with Horizon Canopy, they have to activate, they gain a life, but then, you know, they lost a life, right? So, they lose life off of this, they go to 2, go back to 3, and then die to the Skewer. But with Ghost Quarter in play, what happens here is our opponent Ghost Quarters their own thing, is able to activate Stoneforge Mystic, put in Batterskull, gain a life, go to 1, and then untap and attacks with Batterskull, and that's kind of just game. Like, you know, there are some outs here, potentially Flicker Wisp. Yep, so they get to gain life. So, Ghost Quarter, Death and Taxes players, like, I give the deck a lot of crap, but the deck has a lot of, like, little interactions like that if you don't pay attention to them, you can actually find yourself dead. So me actually going for the Skull Crack the previous turn actually was the incorrect play, or at least is aligned, because I was just thinking they were just dead regardless, and then it turns out they weren't. So anyways, on to game number 3. So I kind of switched things up. I flipped the 4th Boros Charm for one of the Eidolons back in the deck. One of the other things you could argue is that I should bring in Wear Tear to have more answers to their Batterskulls and such, as well as Ether Vial. So that might have been a mistake to not bring in one of these over the copy of Eidolon we brought in. I just thought Eidolon was a little bit better on the play. So, taking a look at our opening hand. Hand's pretty good. We have Swift Spear into Vortex with a couple removal spells, so overall feels pretty reasonable. Swift Spear attack. Opponent does the thing. We play Inspire or Roiling Vortex. They don't have Path or anything. They play Core Firewalker, which is like obviously annoying, but we have a Path. Get it out of the way. Get in for some damage. Once again, maybe I'm supposed to use Bolt there, but I want to hold it for creatures. And then do the thing. I have Lava Spike here, which I play, but I screwed up by not activating Roiling Vortex there, which was a point of damage, which may or may not be relevant. It's possible I'm supposed to attack there with Swift Spear. It's kind of a free attack, but they have a path anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. Opponent does the thing. They start pressuring our left turtle back. They Apparition. We go ahead and do the thing. Bolt the Apparition to get a 2/2 blue creature so their guy can't attack. Crack our thing. Unfortunately, we don't have any legal targets for Searing Blaze. Our opponent plays Athalia, plays Noble Hierarch. Being careful with their thing. Once again, racing us back. I go ahead and Searing Blaze their Thalia, put them to 6. Unfortunately, we can't kill them if they chump block here, which they do. I choose to not cast my spells. Once again, Ghost Quarter. Ghost Quarter a bit plays into things. As a spoiler alert. And I draw Lightning Bolt. So what do I do here? I choose to Lightning Bolt their face. Put them to 7. I Lava Spike them. Put them to 5. This should theoretically be lethal, right? Ghost Quarter themselves. Get Activate. Go to 4. Stay at 1. So if I would have pointed one of those burn spells at Scavenging Ooze, we'd be in a lot better situation. Fortunately, I didn't, so they just kind of get to do the thing here. The only card in my deck that would kill them, theoretically, is Boros Charm, but as we all know, there's no Boros Charm in my deck. So I attack just to see if they'd be stupid here. Just kind of dumb, because theoretically I could chump block, or, chump block, bolt this, and then we still have another draw, but we know that there's no out in our deck that would get us in that spot. So You know, some people might leave in Boros Charm in these style of matchups. It's usually one of the first cards I board out in these creature-based matchups. You know, once again, that little stuff with, like, you know, Ghost Quarters and such, you know, that ended up being relevant whether we would win this match and be 3-0 in this particular league overall at this point, because those were the first 3 matches of this league. And I'm going to kind of end the video there. Just quick wrap-up thought process. You know, even when you're playing a deck like Burn, you know, the small little things can matter more and more. You know, the big things with Burn, obviously, it's, you know, your sequencing, you know, your mulligan decisions, etc., maximizing your mana usage, you know, and sequencing your spells properly. But little things, you know, like a Death and Taxes deck when they're Ghost Quarters and not dealing themselves damage with Horizon Canopies, you know, ends up being relevant in these situations. So something to always keep in mind is, you know, when you're playing against someone who's pretty good with their deck, you know, don't always assume that just because it looks like they're dead that they don't have some type of out that you can't pay attention to. Like if we would have, you know, bolted or, you know, skewered their scavenging ooze there, yes, they would have been able to gain a life and they wouldn't have died immediately, but then our dude can hold off their you know, Core Firewalker or whatever, and maybe buy us enough couple of turns to draw the burn we need to close out the game, or draw a Path to Exile, you know, any number of things. Hard to say what's going on in their hand too, but, you know, overall, interesting game, and just thought I'd point out some of the little errors there that sometimes can cost you games.